doing the adjustment. Yeah, we're live. Hopefully there's not too much fan wash on the microphone there. If there is, please let me know, and I will go ahead and make the necessary adjustments. It's just warm up here, so I got to have the fan going. I can maybe turn that a little bit and see, so we get a little bit more. Hopefully we get the swirl and get the tornado thing going. It's all good. Hopefully all you guys are doing well. What we're going to talk about tonight is the thumbnail that I have up is the Rotrex supercharger. So they sent me a kit to put on, and we installed it on the turbo Tahoe. Now it's the blower Tahoe. It's all good. A boosted Tahoe, no matter how you get it, is obviously awesome. A lot better than a naturally aspirated Tahoe, because let's face it, on a full-size vehicle like that, a 5.3, as good as, as much as we like the LS motors and as good as the little 5.3 is going to do, it's still a little 5.3, and this one's all stock. So it definitely is in need of boost, and this provides exactly that. So we did run, when I say we, I mean Jimmy tested this thing both. We obviously ran all the stuff naturally aspirated. We did run it in non-intercooled form, and then also using our intercooler, our air-to-water intercooler from our turbo kit, which hopefully we'll be offering for too long here. But it's nice because the Rotrex kit didn't come with any sort of intercooler. It comes as a what they would call a tuner kit. So there's no tuning. It comes as a bolt-on kind of bracket assembly and all that. We had to also get, and I'll go over this in the full video that I'm doing on all of this, and you guys will see there's a bunch of data that we'll talk about in the full video. But it required installation of an ATI damper, and so Jimmy did that. And to drive the supercharger, it came with, we tested it the way that they supplied it with the supplied pulley on the blower and this ATI damper, which replaced the things that replaced the factory dampener, and then allowed us to bolt on. The supercharger had its own drive, basically. It wasn't part of the serpentine system. A lot of times superchargers are done like that, where you just kind of insert the blower drive somewhere in the factory serpentine routing. You're rerouting it with idlers and tensioners and stuff. But this one had its own dedicated drive, and so Jimmy said there's no belt slippage or anything. Was that all of that was awesome? So that part all worked good. And the other thing that's interesting, and we talked about this on one of the other live feeds, and that's that we ran the same tune that we had in this thing for the turbo setup. So the Tahoe was already set up, we'd already run both the GTX 3584 RS turbo and the G42, and did lots of testing with those, in the real world. And then we also did a pump upgrade on this. We put one of our 525 plus pumps on there, and then we put 1000 cc injectors in it. And then Joel and Jimmy have done all the tuning on it. And so we have done two different style tunes on this, let's say. So we did one where we're using the factory mass air meter, and so we're blowing through the factory mass air meter. But when we're turning the boost up on these things with the turbo kit anyway, we were getting near, kind of maxing out the mass air meter. And so then you go to incorporating a 3-bar map sensor in it, and you get rid of the mass air meter, and that also can be done. We tested this Rotrex with the intercooler setup, our own intercooler setup, and then run through the factory mass air meter, because it wasn't making, didn't turn it up and make a ton of power with it because we didn't have any other pulleys. But also this thing made peak power, at a fairly low RPM. So with a centrifugal, you get a rising boost curve. And so if you keep, if we were to run this thing like it makes peak power, let's say at 5,500, but if we had a cam and everything in it, and we could run it to 7,000, we could make even more power, because the blower would continue the airflow from the blower, and the boost would rise and the airflow would rise, and we would make more power at a higher engine speed. But this was just a stock one, all stock 5.3, other than the things I just talked about, other than the injectors and the tune and the pump and stuff. But the Rotrex worked great. We ran it, or Jimmy ran it, tested it both non-intercooled. So what we did is the Rotrex was mounted on the thing, on the accessory, sharing kind of the accessories. but its own drive belt, its own tensioner, all that worked out really good. And then Jimmy made a discharge tube, just configured one for the dyno test on the chassis dyno, routing the discharge from the supercharger right into the throttle body. Now, this took a little bit because of the way that the Rotrex the discharge was aimed, out toward the fender well. And so we had to reroute it, which was not a big deal because we wanted to incorporate the mass air meter. And so, we had to have enough room to run the mass air meter. And then the same thing with the at least I think he did. I don't think he ran it on the map sensor. I'll have to ask him which direction. I thought that we were talking about running it through the mass air meter. So he made a discharge tube for the blower running just directly into the throttle body. And then also he just left our intercooler assembly in place that we had run on the turbo, and then configured the blower to run into that without changing, because we didn't want to destroy the tubing that we had done for the kit, because we're making the other production pieces off of that. And plus it had all of the stuff for the data so that we could get charge temperature and boost pressure and all that stuff, and we could see what was going on once we put the intercooler on. And so we tested it both ways, is what I'm saying basically. And when we ran this thing, it was making out at 6,000 RPM, it was making as much as 11 to 12 pounds of boost. It wasn't making peak power there. It was making peak power closer to 5,500, where the boost was lower. Because even though we have a rising boost curve, the factory motor doesn't want to make peak power very high, because it's got a stock camshaft in it, it's got a truck manifold, it's got stock exhaust manifolds, it's got all that stuff. So it's, and again, all of those things would help to make more power. Like we put long tube headers on it. If we put a low butt truck camshaft in it, or a truck Norris or Chopacabra, put a BTR camshaft in there, anything that you would put in there would obviously help a lot in terms of, getting the power output up. And then the secondary benefit was the boost would come down. So we did all that. And then running the blower, it made, I think 345 at the tire or something, non-intercooled. I think that's where we were. Yeah, so on the first run, 347.5 at 5350. And 365 foot-pounds of torque at 4,600. That was non-intercooled. And then the interesting thing is Jimmy made runs, one and then another one, and then obviously the power came down on the second run, which is pretty normal. Put temperature in that thing in a non-intercooled deal, and then I don't have the charge temperature data here, but we'll take a look at that, particularly because all the stuff was hooked up to our intercooler section. So we have temperature data before and after the intercooler, so we can talk about what the drop in charge temperature was. And then we know that the intercooler works well. We know that it's sized for, 3 times this amount of power. So that's not an issue. I think that there was only a drop of a pound or less going through the intercooler, and we would expect that only because we're dropping the charge temperature. So it picked up, let's call it about 100 horsepower at that boost level. And I need to ask Jimmy what the boost was actually at where the horsepower peak occurred, because it's going to be lower than that. It's not going to be 10 pounds. It's going to be 8 or 9 or whatever down where the horsepower peak was. So I need to ask him about that. But then we hooked it up and we ran the intercooler with it. And as I said, all this was done with the same tune that we ran the turbo stuff on. So, and all of that worked great. And then we put the intercooler on and ran it, and it made about another 30 horsepower. And then the interesting thing, as we would expect with the intercooler, when we ran the intercooler and then ran, repeated runs, there was only a slight drop in power of 7 or 8 horsepower or whatever. So it stabilized everything with the intercooler, so that if you were to run this out in the real world, out on the street, you would continue to make the same power essentially. And you can see from the thumbnail photo that Jimmy also had to configure an air intake for it. And this is similar to what we did when we were doing lots of testing with the turbo stuff, is we ran the air intake tube down into the essentially the fender well, where we were getting cold air outside of the engine compartment. We did the same thing. He just aimed it up. We didn't want to make and move everything and make a dedicated air intake for the Rotrex because it's not going to really stay on the Tahoe. We're going to go back to putting the turbo stuff on. We do want to drive it around. Jimmy's going to drive around with a snorkel scoop on there or figure out a way to do that. And so we want to drive it around, and he kind of wants to compare it so we could talk about that. He wants to kind of compare it to how it felt with the turbo. It had a G42 on there. He's driving around a lot. And then we're going to put the smaller turbo back on and also do road stuff on that. We've already done all the blower or all of the testing on the dyno, so we know what that does. But he wants to put the smaller turbo on and see what happens, and kind of how it feels. And then we got a good variation and stuff. We've got a bigger turbo, smaller turbo. We got the Rotrex. We've got a lot of data, both dyno data and subjective data, basically to see how it feels. The kit is very nice. It's nicely done. We're going to talk about in the video some things that Jimmy noticed, and we're going to talk to the Rotrex guys about it. One of the brackets there seemed to be a little bit of interference with one of the brackets and the steering on it. So we're gonna go over that. But he was able to get all of the testing done, and it's a nice looking assembly. When we ran the intercooler with because when you put the pulley on to drive the blower, the distance between that accessory essentially and the radiator is close. And so the tube has to snake past that on our intercooler setup. And with a factory assembly, not a problem at all. There's plenty of room there. But with the Rotrex extending that out with another drive pulley for the supercharger, things get a little tight. It still worked and it still goes there. It's just that you'd have to be mindful of making sure that everything is solidly mounted with that intercooler assembly, just to make sure that, or even you could maybe oval the tubing just a little bit, which wouldn't hurt the flow at all. But just to make sure that it's not really an issue. I like having an intercooler on stuff. I can't believe how long I ran my Vortex supercharger, which was awesome, on my 5-liter Mustang. I loved having a boosted Mustang. I felt like the king of the road, even though I at something that was making 400 or something at the tire way back then with heads and cam and all that stuff in the Mustang, 400 or 450 or whatever at the tire, it was just not the king of the road. But I thought it was everything. That's what happens when you're young and boosted, that you have a good time. But so it was the Rotrex stuff all turned out great. It kind of did what we thought it would do, 360 something at the tire when the thing was intercooled and we were running this all on E85 like we did with the turbo stuff. We could also run it under, with 91, which we have 91 results up on the turbo stuff. You just have to take timing away. And with the centrifugal blower, because you have a rising boost curve, you would take away less timing than you would with a turbo, but it would be as part of the tuning anyway, because, at 3,000 RPM, if it has less boost, there would be more timing there in the way that we manipulate the timing curve anyway. So all of that would work out just fine. But on 91, you'd strip some timing out of it. The air fuel would be the same, but it would definitely make less power on 91, but still more power than you would make, obviously, if you were naturally aspirated. So it's good. But we'll see what you guys got going on. Good evening. Modesto's in the house. Lunchbox, Turbo Centro. What's going on? Good evening from Maryland, all the way, and that's where I was born, actually, all the way on the other side of the country. 6-liter with heads and cam. Dragon with loaded trailer, 5.3 and 10 PSI, pulled like a diesel. I call it the ego boost. Yeah, big difference between a boosted motor, like a 5.3 with boost, and then a 6-liter. It's not even going to be close, because it's going to be, 100 or more foot-pounds better, and maybe 200, depending on 10 pounds is a lot. Also from Maryland, what's going on? Good to see you. Getaway, what's going on? I've seen ported Trailblazer S intakes. Do you think that's a big improvement in it being ported? I don't know. I've never tested one that showed power, so I just don't know. You would think if it's ported and it flows more and that was restrictive, that you could gain power, but I don't know that it's ever going to be what a fast is. But it's also not going to be $1,200 or whatever. Tristan, what's going on? 360 wheel. Let's see if it would do more. It can do more. There's certainly more blower, but 360 on a stock motor is about what we expected given the boost level. There. From an island in Canada on the East Coast. What island is it? Is it Mackinac? No, I don't think that's there. Nova Scotia. Prince Edward. Okay. I have heard of that. Yeah, the blower stuff was cool. It takes me back to the stuff that I was doing, and it did, you know, like I said, adding 100 horsepower or more is that's all good. And then that thing obviously can support, we're told by the Rotrex guys that thing can support, you know, more than 1,000 horsepower. I think that they were saying 1,200. So it'd be interesting to see. You probably would have to, you know, put a radius air inlet on it and turn the thing way up, and also have it on not a stock 5.3 motor, have it on something that could utilize it. Greetings. I understand from you that if I boosted the engine, I should expect the same curve, but with higher number. Not all boosted doesn't work that way. When you asked that question, we were talking about a turbo specifically. So if you add a turbo to a combination and you have a consistent amount of boost, like you add 8 pounds everywhere in the curve, you'll just make more power. The curve will be exactly the same. On this one, the curve is not the same because it has a rising boost curve. So it might only have a couple of pounds down low, and then it has a lot of boost at the top. And so the curve changes. The curve can also change on positive displacement blowers, not because of the boost, but because normally they change the intake manifold too. So if you put a 671, 871, a Magnuson, a Kenny Bell, whatever, and then they also, as part of their kit, have a short runner lower manifold section. Like a lot of times they do that so they can stuff an intercooler in there, an air-to-water intercooler in there. When they do that, then it also changes the curve. So all boosted things don't do what you're talking about or what we talked about. My fast intake fuel rail holes came in wrong size according to my engine builder. Fast air caused engine fire. Is this common with fast? It says fuel spilled out of the fuel rails because the rail holes were not the spec that was ordered. You don't order a fuel rail hole or a are you talking about the holes that hold the fuel rail down, or are you talking about the holes that the injectors go into? Because you have to adjust your fuel injectors, or more specifically the O-rings that are on the fuel injectors, to the rail. It's not the other way around. The rail doesn't fit all injectors because all injectors don't have the same O-rings on them. So you have to make the O-rings big enough so that they seal in the rails. Longtime small block Chevy person. I'm getting ready to build my first LS. Love the information. Happy we could help, man. You'll like it. Small block Chevy is great, and they, you know, you obviously can make power with them. The LS is nice because it starts out with, compared to most small block Chevys, it starts out making like, you know, 100 more horsepower or something. If the difference between cam stages is around 10 or 20 horsepower, it would not make a big difference when boosted, meaning I can choose a small one and still get great power. Is that correct? Yeah, and there's actually more than that. You're kind of oversimplifying it. But here's the thing to think about is if you put a turbo on a motor, the turbo dictates how much power you make. So if you're going to pick a cam for it, you should pick a cam that helps spool up that turbo. So you don't need a big cam. If that's a 1,000 horsepower turbo, it could make 1,000 horsepower. It's going to do that if you put a big cam in it or a small cam. That's not going to change that. But what it is going to change is how the turbo spools up, how quickly you get boost. So that's why, that's why the low buck truck camshaft sells so well for an LS application, because it's really good, as all cams are, really good boosted cam, because it has good low speed power, and it also allows you to make, you can max out 1,000 horsepower or more turbo. Had a crazy night. Neighbor tried to blow up his house. 5-hour standoff. Oh, that's not good. Injector holes. The holes that are in the manifold that the injector goes down into. Again, you have to size the O-rings. You have to most of the time we always have to change O-rings for a fast, and for other manifolds too. You have to make the O-rings big enough so that they seal in the fast. That's not a design flaw in the fast. That's a not putting the right injector O-ring in it. A similar problem with a Falconer intake I got. Previous owner made custom fuel rails and injector holes were loose, so it leaked fuel. How are the injector holes loose? Again, there's lots of different size O-rings that you have to make the injector fit and not leak. To find thicker O-rings to stop the leak. Yep, that's all normal stuff. That's all part of making it work. I sacrificed a tad bit of spool for chop. Yeah, you can want it to sound a certain way. That's why I like the low buck truck camshaft, is it has that sound, has enough of that sound. So you're saying if bigger injectors were used that were not meant for the fast, then I could cause fuel leak. That makes sense. That's what my engine builder says. Well, yeah, what I'm saying is that if you have a stock injector and it goes in the hole in the fast and moves around, then that's because the injector, that's not because the hole is wrong. That's because the injector O-ring is wrong. You need to change that. That's the changeable piece. You can't change the size of that hole, but you can put different O-rings on it. Injector O-rings are easy to pop off and put new ones on. That will also cause a boost leak and a vacuum leak potentially, which could hurt idle quality and drivability or stuff. Yeah, I'm surprised that your engine guy didn't know that. Can't wait to hear my small block Chevy run. Should be able to rev to 6,500 or so. Nice. So you can put springs in it. Got them roller rockers on it. Is a truck Norris cam good for spooling turbos? Yeah, it is. We've talked about that at length. That BTR cam is really good. Anything I should look out for when building a 6-liter? Thinking truck Norris cam, ported heads, Trailblazer SS, 50-pound injectors, valve springs, L7 lifters, BTR rail rockers. Yes, all of that will work fine. You don't need rail rockers for what you're doing. You probably don't need to port the heads because the camshaft that you're putting in a 6-liter, that truck Norris cam, is fairly mild. So I don't know how much gain you'll get from the porting. You get more from a ported head if all of the rest of the things on the motor need the extra flow. And a truck Norris cam or our low buck truck camshaft or Chupacabra, any of that size camshaft that makes that kind of power, ported heads are not going to add a whole bunch of power, because the ported heads can support 600 or more horsepower. And if you're at 450, you're not going to take advantage of those heads. Will cause fuel trims to go wonky. Yeah, if you have a vacuum leak, and that's not good. And if you have fuel being blown out, that's also not good. 706 heads on a 6-liter would be nice instead of porting 317s. 706s will add compression. and they'll add power everywhere basically compared to 317s. I don't know that I would port 317s again. I would maybe do something else. If I was doing boost, I wouldn't worry about any of that. But you could port either one of those and they will flow a lot more and make a lot more power. And so now we're wondering, as soon as we are done with the testing on the Rotrex and then we put the turbo stuff back on, we want to then start going into camshafts. Just trying to make as much power naturally aspirated. Yeah, if you're trying to make a lot of power, then I would pick a different camshaft, because I would pick a bigger camshaft. But the reason that camshaft and our low buck truck camshaft and those kinds of camshafts are so popular is because they have enough cam sound. They make really good average power gains, and they have pretty good drivability. When you start going up in a camshaft that's not 212, that's 224, 232, whatever, you start trading drivability. A lot of guys want to do that because they're chasing, a lot of NA horsepower. If you're wanting to make, more than 500 or between 500 and 600, you're going to have to do all that stuff. It's going to be a big camshaft, compression helps, ported heads, fast intake manifold or something like that, fast intake manifold deal, all that helps, but you're trading stuff. The GT45 turbo on a 6-liter with a chopper copper cam spool's pretty good, in my opinion. Yeah, a 6-liter and that camshaft should help a GT45 spool. And if you like it, spool rate to me is a subjective thing. Some people think that every turbo is laggy just because you step on it and it's not immediate. But I'm like, okay, well, let's take the turbo off and drive it NA and then tell me what you think. How laggy is that? And that's all the way laggy because you never get any gain. So that's bad. So when it spools up, is full boost, like as soon as you nail the throttle, like 200 RPM later, is that immediate boost? Is it 500? Is it 1,000? Is it 50? Where is it for people? And that's a thing. Velocity overflow I don't know about like esoteric. That's esoteric to me. We would need to get way more specific. That's way too general. Engine is stock, K&N, LT, long tube, 373s, 12-volt. Dorian. Okay, 2000 Trans Am. My oil pressure sending unit is leaking like crazy. I have to take the intake off to get it, so it's going to get an aftermarket intake. Not sure what to go with. Looking for more power. 2000. I don't remember when they started, when they added the LS6 intake manifold to all the LT1s, which is what I think you have on in your motor, or what is in your vehicle. So if you have an LT1 intake manifold, any of the intake manifolds are going to be an upgrade. So your problem is that you're going to have it's going to be hard to fit. So an LS6 intake manifold would be good. The Dorman LS2 style manifolds are also good. They're hard to find and now they're expensive. A fast obviously is the best choice for that kind of thing. Again, expensive though. Lag is just traction control. Yep. If it spooled any faster, it just knocked the tires off. Well, then you're good, man. Turbo on E46 is very responsive. Turbo sizing matters. I agree. What would you recommend as an NA cam for high power? The Truck Norris cam is going to get something 550 lift. Yeah, the lift is not the thing to be concerned with. You can look at, I have lots of videos up where we tested lots and lots of different camshafts. But a BTR hot rod cam would be better than that. Our truck plus cam would be better than that. A sloppy stage 2 or 3 would be, and when I say better, I just mean it would make more peak power. It's going to make a lot less power down low than the Truck Norris or the low buck truck camshaft. You're going to trade power when you do this. A lot of guys are not happy with that because they step on the gas and the thing is like slower than it was stock. It charges hard on the big end once it gets going, but it just feels sluggish down low. Small runners is basically what I'm saying, because guys will just hog out the runners and lose so much torque. Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and there is a little bit of logic to that. But in the testing that I've done on port volume, which I have specific tests up just on port volume, when you have a bigger port and it flows more, it usually makes more power, and it usually makes more power everywhere. Very rarely do we lose power when that occurs. It's hard to make the port really, really big and then lose a bunch of power. A case in point is the LS3 manifold. The LS3 manifold, I mean, the LS3 intake, or the LS3 cylinder head and intake is really good, but the LS3 head flows a lot more than any of the cathedral port heads. It will lose power down low compared to, let's say, a 243 head or 799 head. Part of that is because it's a much bigger combustion chamber than the cathedral port head. Also because the cathedral port head is a smaller port, but also, and I would point to this, I would point to the other things. I would point to the chamber size, and then I'd also point to the valve size on the cathedral port heads if you're comparing those. But then also you have the cathedral port intake manifold, which is not as good, as relatively speaking, as the LS3. So it's a hard comparison to make. But the LS3 head is a bigger port, and guys that are talking about port volume, that's the first thing that they point out. They don't look at all the other things that we just talked about, which all have, they all have some effect. LS1, yeah, that's what I figured. Is porting the stock heads on LS2 and a fast intake worth the money if you plan on adding a blower? I wouldn't do that if I was adding a blower. Dustin, what's going on? My Spirit RT, very nice. Has no lag, just transmission instruction power. Do you have the thing turned up on that? Those are cool, by the way. I almost bought one of those. In fact, before I bought my Omni, that's what I was going to buy, and the guy ended up selling it. I like those. Why do you want a lower compression ratio for boost is a myth. Well, what it does is give you a much bigger tuning window. So if you have high compression and you have boost, your tune has to be spot on for any given octane. If you have low compression, then the tuning window is a lot more forgiving, let's say. Saw the curve that compares the low buck truck and the Ripper cam. The low buck truck makes more power everywhere, but the overall curve style is similar. If I'm boosting, should I consider the horsepower difference? No, actually, and this is maybe one of the best kept secrets for our stuff anyways, is that if I was boosting something, if I had a 4.8, particularly a 4.8 or a 5.3, or if I was thinking about putting that camshaft in a 6.0, I would get the Ripper cam. I would get it because if you're going to be running a turbo, you just turn the boost up to make that amount of power. Now the Ripper cam is a lot less money. Not a lot. It's some money less than a low buck truck camshaft. And it's just like with a cylinder head. You don't need a ported cylinder head with a turbo. The turbo is going to dictate that. And the Ripper cam is big enough. It idles better than the low buck truck camshaft is. And it's big enough that it adds enough power. I think it adds about 50 horsepower. It adds enough power that you can make all of what a turbo is going to make with that camshaft. So don't tell anybody about that. That's probably that's a really, really good cam choice for guys that are later on going to turbocharger. It's amazing how much harder a vehicle pulls on a prep track versus the street. Makes you think, maybe I don't need more power, I need more traction. It definitely is the case. And it's pretty easy to get to that point. I'm sure you would agree that, especially with the boosted application, it doesn't take very much. If you have a big, heavy vehicle like the Tahoe, then you don't have to worry about it as much. But if you have a Camaro or a Corvette and you put a turbo on even a stock motor, you get to where traction is definitely necessary. Richard, what's your experience with the low buck truck and truck plus and running 1.8 rockers? I don't know why you would want to do that. I honestly don't know why guys want to put 1.8 rockers on anything that's an LS. What do you mean by quench? I feel like heads are expensive for the performance you get. Am I wrong? Like $2 to $4 grand for better heads? No, they're very, very good, depending on whether if you're trying to get the power NA, ported heads are a necessity. The other time when they become a necessity is when you're trying to make a lot of power and the factory heads, the deck thickness isn't thick enough for the power output and the cylinder pressure. And so you have to have better heads. And so if you don't have better heads, then you're going to blow head gaskets and stuff. So those would be examples. Otherwise, for the normal range, I would call like the 1,000 horsepower and less stuff. That stock heads are fine. Head studs, I like ARP stuff. Put head gaskets on it, and then you're good. Turbos Unleashed, okay, Super 70, tuned to 14 pounds, no wastegate modulation. So what is it? Do you have a controller on it or something? Or is it just a spring and a bleed valve or something? Quenches distance between the piston and the head is very important for mixture motion and detonation, but too tight creates problems. 4-digit power on the street to liquefy stars. Yeah, that's 1,000 horsepower on the street is hard to deal with. Even for roll racing guys, like on the freeway or whatever, wherever they're doing their nonsense, 1,000 horsepower spins the tires at even very high speeds. Some has cathedrals for 1,500 a pair. Spring and bleed valve. Okay. Yeah, 14 pounds on that motor would be good. Do you have a Turbos Unleashed exhaust manifold for that? Do they make one for that? For that 4-valve motor? That was the fastest production sedan in America at one time, right? That and the SHO Taurus were battling it out. I was and still am good friends with the guy that owned the show shop, Vadim. So I was down there a lot doing hanging around the show shop stuff, and so we got to hear a lot about that. Which the SHO Taurus motor was a really good motor. We like those. Those are cool. The Omni that I bought had a big front mount on it. It had a Turbos Unleashed exhaust manifold. It had their turbo on it. I don't know what size it is. It had the Granger valve on it. It had a bunch of stuff on it. It also had at least one bad piston, and probably two. That's okay. We put together another motor for it, and it was a 2.5 that was in it. 20 psi is alive. Yes, it's a TIG welded header. He built it custom. Okay. Oh, that's cool. Just learning about the good old coolant bypass for the throttle body. Is that on the LS? That's for a lot of motors. I remember that was a thing back for the 5-liter Mustang and for the Grand Prix thing and all that. I've got an extra 16-valve engine. I have the 2.5 now. It's ready to go back together. We have a what is basically a reproduction of a bone stock T2, the Shelby version, the GLHS motor. So I'm going to have a preference on oil and a 6.2 tow vehicle. 530 seems like the go-to over 0.20. My real question is during break-in and hot summer. Yeah, I would run 530 in it. A lot of 80s and 90s cars have throttle body heated lines. Yeah, I think that the Hondas did too. At GLHS number 50. Cool. I do like those cars. Mine is a GLH, but we made it into a GLHS, but it's the blue color, whatever the blue color is. I forgot what it's called. Brian from the car farm painted it. It looks amazing. That's my favorite color. I like it better than the black ones. The black ones are cool, and they, you know, that's what they came in. But the blue color is a lot better. So it's, I want to say it's one of one, but somebody else, I'm sure, has done that. Santa Fe, yeah. Santa Fe. It's all blue too. It's not a two-tone. If I run the exhaust header to the back of the engine where it's normally wide and turn it back to the other side of the engine, where do I put a single turbo? Will that affect the turbo? Where are you going to mount your turbo if you're running one exhaust into the other? I mean, that's what we do on our kit. We use one stock exhaust manifold on the driver's side. We replace the manifold on the passenger side. The passenger side has the mount for the turbo and for the wastegate. It also has a provision where that would normally exit, but what's happening is the exhaust from one side of the engine feeds into that, and then they both feed the turbo, and that works fine. So putting the Trailblazer SS's up, yeah, I think we will. I think we now have located some. Do you recommend undersized bearings with the high flow and pressure oil pumps? Also, what oil should I run? I don't know what you mean by undersized bearings. We change bearing clearances when we build motors, but on stock ones, we don't change bearing clearances. I was told mine was a test car for the magazine reviews. Oh, that's kind of cool. I heard they cheated that one up. That they raised the boost on it for the magazine tests. My Conquest and Stario and 2 cars I wish I kept. Yeah, those are cool. Did you have slab side ones or did you have the flared ones? In reference to the tuning window, if you're running 85 and high compression turbo cheddar, your tuning window opens up if it doesn't. Yeah, the E85 versus 91, it opens up a lot. You could run way more timing and way more boost with E85. If yours was blue, is the one that you're talking about a GLH then and not a GLHS? Because the GLHS would have been black. The one that they tested. Did they test a GLH then? It was a bad influence the other day. I sent a link to your Ripper Cam and you order one within a few minutes. Hey, that's what we love to hear. Like I said, I'm well, and I haven't really promoted that too much because that's the same thing that I've been saying about cams is pick a small cam, you know, for a turbo so that it spools up. And I've been pointing everybody to the Lobo truck camshaft, which is good. It works very, very good. But in all honesty, the Ripper Cam will do what that does for boost. And then if there's a little bit less power from that camshaft, it's just like, hey, wait, look, now it makes the same. And I save $50. The flared ones, okay. It was first black, then painted blue. Oh, so he did the same thing that he did with the first Cobra. He painted it different colors to make it think that we got a bunch of these. Yeah, you can pick any color that you want. Sent it first in just aluminum and then painted it. That's the thing, is it painted different colors. I remember meeting Carol Shelby at Willow Springs. Jeff Smith was there, and there was some Shelby event that was happening, and we were there on the track, and I remember, and I didn't even know about this because I wasn't there when it happened, but they walked by my Mustang because it had a Vortec and all that stuff on it. It went pretty fast, and Jeff said, yeah, that thing went like 190 miles an hour. Shelby's like, no way. He's like, yeah, it did. So I got that. That's my Shelby story. Richard's going in a 2-wheel drive, 5.3 Avalanche, long tube, cold air tune, Trailblazer. Okay, blue collar. What was your question? Oh yeah, that'll be good. This might sound odd, but I would wish I would have kept my Ford Tempo. There you go. Chassis and body were good, but the engine was toast. A K-Swap Tempo would be a real sleeper. That'd be great. That's great. Yeah, because I'd run that Mustang out the Silver State a whole bunch. What would you recommend for injectors? LQ4, 243, truck Norris cams. I would put we have 50s that are available right now at richardholderperformance.com. That's what I would put in there. They're the flex fuel injectors. Hi, baby. What are you doing, huh? What are you doing? Oh, I know, Mommy's gone for a little bit, huh? She is. I know, babies. Hello. Say hi. Say hi. Here, put your nose up. Oh, I can just see my nose. Hello, hello, hello. I know it's hot up here. I know. I turned the AC on, huh? Silver State Classic. Also scored an LFA. Oh, nice. Out of Escalade. Well, what? I cannot let you out. I'm trying to work. I'm doing a live feed. You know what the deal is. It's only been 45 minutes. It's not an hour. I think you're a little early on your watch. I think you are. Are you trying? Oh, you're probably trying to tell me that it's time to eat, huh? It is time to eat. You got 15 minutes though. Just a minute. Oh, I will. Built my Spirit for the Silver State. I had a friend that had tried to run a Mercure XR4 Ti, which I love. They're awesome. But he tried to go with too much boost. He was trying to run like 20 pounds, which is not good for a race where you are at wide open throttle for like a half hour. So it just was. He blew it up. So it was not in the cards. Be doing some conversion stuff to put it in a Silverado. There you go. To a dog, 15 minutes is forever. It is. It's like 7 times that much. He's good though. Owen, can you feed him? He just came up and asked me. We're running 26,000. Kinetic head gas could be too much for my LM7. Also, you've milled the heads 15. Yeah, you don't want to do that. I'd be worried about. First of all, you need to find out how much the pistons are out of the hole. A lot of times, LS pistons are out of the hole already, and so if you put all that stuff together, that's not a good deal. You don't. Why are you wanting to have such a thin head gasket? A 41 is fine. Why do we always create the same diameter exhaust manifolds? What if we made one bigger than the other while going to the turbo? Wouldn't that make more pressure and help the turbo spool? I don't know which one are we making bigger. Our manifold that mounts the turbo, that exhaust manifold is the tubing on it's bigger. Not the runners are not, but the common plenum area is bigger than the factory one is. But you should not worry about that stuff. That's not what's going to create power. The turbo is going to create the power. Look at the opening size on the turbo, and then come talk to us about the other stuff that's happening on the front side of that. That's not a thing to be concerned with. Compression increase. I have an 047 head gasket now. Yeah, I think you're getting into the zone where you're getting minimal gains, and with maximum, you're also maximizing the problem areas. So you're getting to where the trade-off isn't a good trade-off. If you're trying to build a class-specific drag race motor and you're going through this effort, yeah, then maybe you got to look at that stuff because rules eliminate you doing other things. But otherwise, I wouldn't try to get it that close. I think 40,000 is as thin as I'd run to avoid piston to valve. I'm not worried about piston to valve. You can, the piston to valve thing should be taken into account when he's talking about this. But I'd be worried about the piston hitting the head. Thoughts on the ACES standalone? I've never used anything of theirs, so I don't know. I have not tested their stuff. This same conversation about the like piston to head clearance is very similar for all the other things too, like piston to valve. If we're putting a camshaft in, or well, can I run? You know, people will tell you got to have 100,000 piston to valve clearance. That's nowhere near accurate. We've run stuff that's way less than that. We've run stuff that's like 10 or 15 thousandths. But because that's a static measurement, and when this thing is dynamic, we have more because we have deflection on stuff. So we have more clearance. So you can run it and it worked. But when you get stuff that is that close, did it work by 1 thou or 2 thou, or you know, did it just kiss the carbon buildup on the top of the piston? And as you go up in RPM, does the rod have more stretch on it? You know, all of these things, and temperature, and like all of these things, the growth rate of the iron block and the crank and all that versus the aluminum head expansion, and all that stuff needs to be taken into consideration. And you start getting closer and closer, and then go, okay, because I got to have that compression in this case, or I got to have this much camshaft to do what I'm doing. And then you get so close, you get in that danger zone, and then it breaks. And so, you know, once you move into that to pass where like 100,000 piston to valve clearance is a ridiculous amount. That's not, you don't need that much. But if you have 50 or 60, that's still really safe. If you have 10 or 20, that's not safe. That's where, yeah, bad things can happen. They can hit. It's like, you know, the question that people have about ring gap. Well, is this much, you know, can I run this with unopened? Yeah, maybe you can. Maybe you have one that already has, for whatever reason, already has clearance in it. It's not going to be a high mileage thing because people think that that's a thing, but it's not a thing. But if you got one that already has, like my L33 had ring gap in it. Most of the other ones I've taken apart do not, and the ring gap is in the teens. But you can take a chance, and then if it breaks, it breaks. And if it doesn't break, it doesn't break. And then also, what are you doing with it? Are you roll racing with it, or are you running the Silver State? What are you doing? Would milling the head be more beneficial? There's a limit to how much you should mill the head too. You're taking away deck thickness, and then you also start to worry about the intake manifold bolting up to the head, and then also the ports actually matching. So you need to think about that too. Isn't an LM7 deeper in the hole, so gasket thickness shouldn't matter? Why would an LM7 be deeper in the hole? An LM7 has a dish piston, but that doesn't change the deck height. Richard, can you elaborate more on the Mercure Rotrex model, or the model discussed? The XR4 Ti was somebody that I knew that ran one. He had a bunch of mods on that. It was a turbo one, obviously, not a Rotrex one. And it had a front mounted intercooler. I just don't know what he did to the fueling on it. I don't think it had a standalone on it. And I think for 20 pounds of boost, I don't know what size injector he had. I don't know what size pump he had. I don't know that he knew what that stuff, anything about that, because he would never talk to us about that. What's the highest compression ratio? Can you get away with boosting on a 5.3? I wouldn't ever ask that question. My question would be, how much power do you want to make? Let's talk about that. Because you shouldn't be wanting to run high compression and boost. Or if you are, let's talk about why you want to do that. The iron LM7 I have, the pistons were at 0 deck, not above or below. L33, it was 4. Was it 4 down or 4 up? Because I've seen them go from, I don't know if I've seen any that are below deck, but I've seen them at 0, and then we've seen them as much as 7 or 8 out. I'm not saying they're all alike, but I've heard iron engines are 0 and aluminums tend to be out of the hole. I don't know why they would do that, why that would be a thing, but that's the first I've ever heard of that. Should be even deck or +6 sticking out. Well, which one of those is it? That's a big difference between those. And also, you don't read about that. You measure that. You don't go on to Chat GTP or whatever, or even come here, because none of us, with as many LS motors as I've taken apart, I can't tell you what yours is. The only thing that can tell you what yours is measuring tools, is actually verifying it. I'll be switching to a Haltech. Yeah, that would be good. Those are nice. But also you have to make sure that you can, in a Silver State race, like I was at wide open throttle for 36 or 7 minutes in my Mustang until we had to lift for the narrows. So can you run your thing at wide open throttle for that long? And can you dissipate all that heat buildup? You know, do you have a good enough cooling system? Will the turbo intercooler and stuff, will all that work? You know, there's a lot going on there. I have 25 to 26 ring gap on my boosted 5.3. That's good. Do you think that the LY6 Big Bang experiment proves that the engine is capable of handling this power repetitively, or just for drag race use and then let it rest? I don't think 1500 horsepower is a level that it will withstand for very long. I think it did so for a few runs, 8 or 9 runs at the higher power levels. And there probably are guys that run it drag racing at that power level. I don't know how many pulls they get out of it like that. But 1500 is at a point where there's also problems with the block and other things. L33 measured to 4 above. I'm just trying to get 350 wheel horsepower in my truck. That shouldn't be hard to do. That's a 5.3 with a cam in it. That's not hard at all. That's a 5.3. Flat top pistons would be ideal. 706 heads, 243 heads. You can mill the 243 heads just a little bit, like 20 or 30. Put a Trailblazer SS on it, and it will do that. If you look on the videos that I did, we were making 450 flywheel with that kind of combination. Near. Yeah, that's not going to take. That's really easy. Yeah, you're trying to worry about little things when you should be worried about big things. Let's go to the turbo stuff, because when we're in that thing NA, all motor. Yeah, so that was 440. Test description. What do we got? L33, stock 799 head, springs, low buck truck camshaft, Trailblazer SS, 92 millimeter throttle body, long tube headers. We were running that on E85, but you can run on 91, made 440 at the flywheel. So put the Truck Plus camshaft in there, or do a little porting or mill those heads or anything, and you're right there. We think about a TSP Mad Max cam and a Gen 3 408, 799 heads, flat tops, 228, 232. That'll be fine. It'll be a mild 408, but that'll be good. A Veron Davis custom radiator, nice. Spirco front mount. I worry about foam in the oil if the wheel bearings can take the speed and heat. Yeah, I don't think that wheel bearings would be a problem. I would use high temperature oil or bearing grease for that, but we haven't had that be a problem. Oiling would be an issue. I would think about an oil cooler and then having a good pan on it, not just a stock pan. What determines how many pulls you can make on an LY6? Well, the number of pulls that we make is not the same as what you would do with it out somewhere else. Like, how long can it run at that power level is the thing. That everything is moving around when we do that. The caps are moving, the rods are moving, the pistons are moving, the block is moving. Everything is moving around, and it's not designed. It was not designed. It doesn't have the structural integrity or the frequency to run at that power level, and then things start to break. High compression should boost fuel mileage and cleaner burn that will be needed when you add fuel to match a cam and intake. I don't know what that's in response to. Bought a 5.3 from a guy. He switched out the pistons for flat tops and wanted to run boost. Well, the 5.3 that we have, the one that I just told you about, is a flat top 5.3. It's a flat top 5.3 because it's an L33. That's the way they came from the factory. So the balance shafts inside. Okay. The other thing you want to think about, Will, is think about RPM. So the lower the RPM for sustained running, the better. The easier it is on the motor. So don't try to wing the thing out. It'd be a lot better to run it at 5,500 or 6,000 than it would be to try to run it at 7,000. So gear it and tire it so that you can run the speed that you want to run at a lower engine speed. That's one of the things that we do at Bonneville. And Bonneville is not nearly what the Silver State is. We got 1 more minute. We never even had a poll. I'll have to wait. We'll do that on the next one. And to answer a question that we had before on the poll, the answer was yes, that we can run the same tune on the turbo combination as on the Rotrex supercharged combination. And the thing does make more power, because I think I asked this as one of the polls too. The thing does make more power with the intercooler as opposed to without. I'll have to ask Jimmy. I'll have to get the data from him on the charge temperatures. I have Vanilla pistons. I'm not worried about piston strength for any of that stuff. A lot of the things, like with the Mustang, we ran stock pistons in it until we put the blower stuff on it. So that really wasn't an issue. But stock pistons, make sure that you have the right piston to wall clearance for running, sustain the heat. Obviously, it's going to be an issue. Swapping 243s on 6 liter that had iron heads. Okay, so 99 or 2000. Also using a low buck truck, 50-pound injectors. It should wake it up. How much would a Trailblazer SS intake be worth versus stock? Lake Customs, take a look at the video that I have up where we ran the Trailblazer SS versus the truck intake manifold. And we did that on a 6 liter, and we did that comparison both with the low buck truck camshaft and the truck plus camshaft. We ran the intake comparison with both of them so you could see. But I think it's 15 or 20 with the Trailblazer SS. Adiabatic on Rotrex now. Is it closer to twin screw? I'd never seen like lab results for those. It would surprise me if a centrifugal supercharger and their impeller on the Rotrex is impressive because it's like a really good modern turbo impeller. So it would surprise me if a centrifugal didn't make more power at any given boost level than if you could get them to make the same boost, like let's say at 6,000 RPM. It would surprise me if a centrifugal didn't make more power than a twin screw. On that note, it is time to go. Can't be doing that. That's crazy talk. But I will see you guys all tomorrow.